Or does it? First of all, what am I going to do with those? But 19 year, again,
over to you, Mark.
We could begin talking at any point, but I will just say that I started this year, again, more for Volume 3 than Volume 2, but it's all part of the mix. I spent the whole of January 2019 listening to the Beatles in January 1969, on each day, the 50th anniversary, listening to all the Nagra tapes that leaked out about 20 years ago. You know, those masses of bootlegs that everybody's got.
I never listened to.
Well, that's it.
Including you, yeah. But now you listen to.
That's it. They had been on my. Somebody at a Beatles convention in Liverpool said, "Here's a set of 150 CDs." 150 CDs. I think that was only the A reels. It wasn't even the A's and B's. There's like 150 CDs, and this is all of January 1969. And I took them home and I put them on my shelf, and I went, "What am I going to do with those?" But on this, for this anniversary month of January, I got it all not condensed. I got it all ordered, got the A's and B's. So I had a complete set of all available audio, all properly integrated, A's and B's, and even I think a C at the end, all integrated so that I didn't miss a thing, but I didn't have duplication either. And it was 97.5 hours of audio, and I just did it on January the 2nd. When they started, I started, and so on and so on. And it got really tough near the end because I was also transcribing. Not everything, but certainly the stuff that needed to be transcribed. I was improving a transcript that already existed, but it needed a lot of work. And I was making notes and following up leads of things that were being suggested. This is a long answer, I only do long answers. It was a revelatory process for me, and I realised that I have always misunderstood that whole month. And it's been got right best by Doug Solpe in his book, but still I would say it could be more right. But that's by far the best, Drugs, Divorce and a Sleeping Image at the moment. But I'm going to write it differently, with different insight.
What's your feeling about that month?
What's my feeling? My feeling is that well, it's a very complex. It was a complex month, but there's a lot of clarity within it. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it was full of surprises. First of all, if John Lennon and George Harrison were the two Beatles who were the most keen to make us think that it was the most, John said, the most miserable sessions on earth. And George also said very similar words, and George Martin talked about endless arguments that they were having, constant arguments. There aren't any. There aren't any arguments at all. What you hear is a cohesive, clear-minded, purposeful group. They're not quite sure what it is what the end product of the thing they've started is going to be. They start rehearsing without knowing how it's going to finish. They can't make a decision on this TV show. It's going to be a TV show, but where are they going to shoot it, and what kind of audience will it have? Or will it have an audience? And will it be in another country, or will it be in England? Those are decisions that they continually discuss during the course of the month, and in the end never resolve. It ends without a resolution other than the fact that they go up on the roof. But if I was to ask you guys, and you guys all know your Beatles very well, and I could ask the listening people as well, the audience, if I was to say to you, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, tell me for each one of those, who wanted to go up on the roof and who didn't? What would you say?
I would say Paul wanted to go up, and George didn't. John, well, eventually he thought, yeah, let's do it. And Ringo is Ringo. I think he got along with the rest of them.
I think John, in connection with Michael Lindsay Hall, decided to go up on the roof.
Right. All four keen to do it?
Yes.
I mean, I don't let me. Well, I didn't mean to turn this into an interrogation, but it's interesting.
It's the same thing as we both think.
I think I would have said Paul wanted to do it. John maybe, George no, and Ringo perhaps. similar to what you've said. Well, there's a clear discussion on the day before they do it. John and Ringo want to do it. George is I don't really. Yes. Paul does. The one who doesn't want to go up there is Paul.
The day before?
The day before. And there's a bit of that in the anthology film when they're talking to. There's a nice bit of film in the anthology in which you see them discussing it. But the implication is that Paul is actually pushing the idea, but in fact he was the one who didn't want to do it. Not because he didn't want to do something with the Beatles. On the contrary, he was very keen. He had lots of ideas of things they should do. Could do. But he didn't want to go up on the roof. He didn't want the roof to be the climax of all the work they've been doing for the month, because that isn't enough of a climax. So it wasn't that he was against the idea of doing it, but in terms of the roof, he was the one who had to be persuaded, and he was the one who was not giving his decision until the morning of the event. Yeah. So
what we wanted to do a more fancy place, right?
Yeah,
like
in the desert or on a boat.
Yeah, no, the desert was never really an option.
Okay, okay. The boat maybe.
Ringo and Maureen talked about this probably between Christmas and New Year. He's going to be he's got a family man now, he's got 2 young children at home. And he likes being around the house, and he likes being with Maureen and with the kids, and he likes to work. But he's going to be making a film in February, The Magic Christian, which he's making throughout the period we will be talking about. So he doesn't want to go abroad in January to do a concert. It's just like, he doesn't want to fit it into his life. It's not suitable for him. So when they begin at Twickenham, he's already made it clear that he won't go abroad, won't go to do this in another country. And the thing about Ringo, and you hear this clearly if you listen to all the tapes from January, is that he doesn't say very much, but when he says something, it carries weight. And if Ringo's not going abroad, it's not happening abroad. It's as simple as that. It's not happening because he's not going, because he doesn't change his mind. You know, you might try and have a go at changing his mind, but usually he's made his mind up, and that's it. So though Dennis O'Dell, the film producer, was suggesting an amphitheatre in Tripoli, it was never really on the agenda. There was a brilliant discussion one night, I don't know, what is it, the 7th or the 8th. The Nagra tapes of 69, they enable you to hear Beatle meetings. How many Beatle meetings do we have recordings of, where they're sitting around chucking in their thoughts and opinions, and you really get to hear the complexity of their interplay. And there's 2 or 3 of those on the Nagra tapes, and there's this one where they're thinking if they 19, it was exhausting but brilliant, and it changed my head on the way that they weren't arguing. It's taken out a difference. They are view of this terrible month in there. Yeah, that didn't help either. That's a very didn't help. Everyone's just got all this tape, and what are they going to do with it? And so February the 1st, sorry.
Okay, what? Well, maybe a positive move, maybe a more positive move.
It may well be. I think it has to be. This into, and in a way, the Let It Be film skewed history to make us think that month was more bleak and more miserable than it actually was. He runs the risk, but the risk is that I did in January. I listened to all of it and changed my views almost completely.
For Mr. Jackson,
if he has interested parties who are paying his way, you know, they're paying his fee, leaning over his shoulder, then there are potential pitfalls there. You know, it depends how much of a free hand he's got. But
do you know how much he's got?
But I don't know. I'm not involved in anyone with as much kudos and as much integrity as him to do it. They could have gone for somebody else. Full marks to Apple for even thinking of him. That had a big name director, but I thought it was safe and pulled punches and glossed somewhat. I think the Beatles should always be treated with complete honesty. And I think if Jackson does, and I expect he will, then it will be great.
You said there's no bickering, but there's also can be a misery in not saying things to each other, like not communicating.
Yes.
George walked out at the middle of the sessions.
Yes.
So there were some arguments. There were some
tensions, yeah.
Yeah, there were things
Tensions,
going on. Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, those are facts. John is quite quiet through the early part of the month, not the whole month, but certainly the early part of the month. He's quite subdued. He's not talking very much. He lets things be in a vacuum, if you like. But if you go back to 19, there's a lot of things in Tune In that relate directly to events that followed later in the 60s. And one of them is that John Lennon always let people sort out their own differences. So he wouldn't necessarily, though he was nominally and actually the leader, he didn't hold an axe over anything. So if people have got a squabble, he lets them squabble, because why should he intervene? It'll work itself out, or they have to work out their own problems, basically, which is quite an interesting idea. And that's basically what's going on with Paul and George, and also John and George. And Yoko is undoubtedly a negative influence on them on events, because there's a couple of days wonderfully that we have recorded where they're sitting around just talking, and George isn't there because he's left, and John and Yoko haven't arrived yet, and they're not sure whether John is coming, and they do talk about the negative impact of Yoko being there, but she doesn't make her presence felt very much during the month of January. You don't hear her very much. There is the period when they do, I think, 3 separate occasions she jams with them. And Beatle people go, oh, it's terrible. She got her way. This was what she wanted all along. She wanted to edge somebody out, and as if Paul and John and Ringo or whoever was in this jam were doing it under sufferance. They weren't. You look at the film, and they're happy to be. They're musicians. They'll jam. One of Ringo's albums that he feels most proud of is the Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band album, which he thought was great. And his drumming on it is fantastic. And his drumming on her jam is fantastic. Her jam's in January '69. So, and we're led to believe that George walked out because he couldn't stand Paul getting at him anymore, and he couldn't stand Yoko being around anymore, and John being a little bit passive aggressive perhaps. But when he didn't want to do the TV show. Those are what we understand are the reasons why George walked out. But when George comes back, they're still talking about doing the TV show. Yoko is still there. John is talking more, much more, but that's a difference. And Paul is still giving him kind of instruction, but much, much less. There are great moments in January '69 when you can hear Paul biting his tongue. When you know that he would be chipping into this bit of the conversation, but he's obviously stopping himself. So the things that the reasons we're led to believe, and I'm sure they're right, that caused George to leave are still in place when he comes back. And he has a very happy period in Savile Row. I did a tweet near the end of January, 25th I think, where George is saying how much he's enjoying playing and how much he's enjoying the studio. No one bitches about Alex's equipment at all. In the whole 10 days or whatever it is at Savile Row that we have tapes of, no one said. They all say how much they're enjoying using the studio. Okay, they've had to bring in mobile gear because but when you look at the film of the studio, it's a proper studio. It's got
everything. I think.
It's got a control room. It's got a cutting room next door that's already up and running. It's got all the wiring is there. I mean, it wasn't put in overnight. There's great banks of electricity. So it wasn't that everything Alex did was wrong, but obviously he was overambitious in what he promised them, or what they believed he had promised them, and they just had to get mobile gear and to be upgrade studio. It's not borne out when you play it.
Oh, revelation, I think. Yeah. Well, let's start now with the spring period, starting February 1st. Starting immediately with business troubles, because on that day there is a heated argument between Alan Klein and John Eastman. And yeah, it was obvious that the combination of these two men as manager and legal advisor was doomed from the start, don't you think?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Yeah. It was. They were. It's funny how the Beatles were suddenly being advised by New Yorkers And there's an American influence increasing. You know, there's quite a few American employees at Apple. There's John Eastman advising them on counsel. Alan Klein, just at this point, being brought in to kind of look into their affairs. They needed that. And Yoko was, you know, Japanese American, and Linda was American. And there is this there's a shift. And Eastman and Klein were just destined. They were cut of different cloths. They had certain things in common in their background, but they were entirely different animals. And they were both going after the same goal, so it became a fight between them for the Beatles' best advice, which wasn't helpful, but it was kind of inevitable.
I'm sometimes surprised by Paul putting his in-laws so forward like this. One of the stories that you write in Tune In, it made me think of that, because you write about Louise Harrison, the mother of George, who at one time wants to put Neil Aspinall aside and put her son Peter Harrison in place of him. And then John says, no, we're not going to have that, thank you, because we're just fine. And, well, there's an obvious problem when a near relative comes into play.
Yes.
I'm sometimes surprised, because Paul seems to be the politically most sensitive Beatle, that he put his in-laws forward like this in '69.
Yeah.
Was it maybe an error of judgment on his part?
I don't suppose he would see it that way. Very good, Michiel, for noticing that, because there is a very clear line between that anecdote in Tune In about 1962 and the events of early 1969. And I was conscious of that when I was writing it, and I wondered who would pick up on it. And you're the first person to say it. Because it was told to me by Neil Aspinall, and he knew what he was saying, because the same theory does apply. If you bring family in, then it changes things, because there's always the possibility of favoritism, or at its most basic level, if, as Neil said, if you wanted to, can I swear?
Sorry.
As Neil said to me, you know, if you want to say, oh, fuck off, Neil, or, you know, that's okay. But if it's Peter, fuck off, Peter. And George would say, hey, don't talk to my brother like that. You know, and then you've got a different kind of feel. You've got a different dimension to the discussion. So it changes things. So when Paul started going steady with Linda, it was natural that he met her family. Obviously, he went to New York and met her family, and it was natural, since the Beatles had a really great need for someone, and since they were clearly had skill in that direction, and certainly from a legal point, I mean, they were lawyers particularly, and the Beatles' contract situation did need sorting out. It was natural that Paul would say, well, you know, maybe you could have a look at this for us, kind of thing. And all four Beatles did agree to John Eastman being their counsel. That's COUNSEL. It means someone who looks at the legal side of things. There is a letter of agreement that they allowed him to be that person for them, because they did need somebody. But that didn't mean that they necessarily wanted him to manage their affairs, just that things needed to be looked at. When John met Alan Klein, that was a wholly different thing, because Alan Klein turned him on in a much more thrilling way, and gave him every assurance that he understood the dilemma that the Beatles were in, and could find a way out of the problems for them. So John didn't say, I appoint you to be the Beatles business manager. He merely said, you can look after my side of things. So that's all he did that night when they met. You can look after my side of things. And then, in the next few days, George and Ringo fell into line. This wasn't to the exclusion of John Eastman. They could coexist in theory. But Paul, obviously with the Eastmans in his ear, said that Klein is, you know, I don't know how much they really knew about him, because it wasn't quite the world they operated in, but nonetheless, he had a reputation. If you read Variety, there was enough in there about Klein to know that he was an edgy player. And so they were probably advising Paul, not Alan Klein, you shouldn't be going with Alan Klein. So it fell into two camps, because George and Ringo sided with Klein along with John, and Paul wouldn't, and
there was no real alternative to Paul. Well, maybe there was, but the Eastmans were the most...
Well, they were never going. Although they had appointed the Eastmans as counsel, that was I don't know how it would have gone after that. But once Klein came in, they wanted him to be much more proactive. John Eastman was merely looking at things and advising, and Klein was going to be the one who was going out there to negotiate. The thing is, Brian, with the Beatles' history, we parcel it up into this was 1963 and this was 1964 and so on. When you're living those lives, you don't see those lines so clearly. And all through 1968, the Beatles need someone to replace Brian Epstein, who's only been gone for months. He's still not been gone for very long. And they're looking for Mr. X. And they've been looking for Mr. X for months now, and they've had various meetings with people, most famously Lord Beeching, who was the man who was cut great swathes of the British railway system that was costing them losing so much money, tried to make it more financially prudent. And then there were various other people that they spoke to, and they couldn't find the right person. And suddenly Klein becomes the Mr. X they've been waiting for, but one of them doesn't want him, and that is a huge issue that surfaces right at the end of the Get Back period. We actually have on film Peter Brown discussing with John and Yoko when they'll be meeting Klein. We're meeting Friday. Oh no, we're meeting Monday night. Tell him we'll meet him Monday night. So we'll be there about 9 on Monday night. So you actually, it's as Peter Jackson's going to have now. We've got all this stuff to look at. It's fantastic how so much of their history was filmed and recorded. But that was the great schism then. The Klein-Eastman thing divided the Beatles. And it divided them in a way they hadn't been divided before, and it was an unbridgeable divide. And in the end, it broke them.
You have also in that, I think in March, that Dick James sells his shares in Nolan Songs to ATV. Can you tell us in short what went on there and why he didn't offer those shares to John and Paul to buy?
Yeah.
It involved a certain Mr. Lou Grade.
Yeah.
Who was he?
Yeah, Lou Grade was a great entertainment impresario, British, based mostly in Britain, but made a lot of international TV programs that were sold particularly to America, but also around the world. Had a hand in every aspect of the entertainment business, from running theatres to TV to obviously lots and lots of live shows and films and all sorts of things. Record company, Pi Records was his record label, and he was a businessman, and Beatles songs were available on what we call the stock exchange, the British version of Wall Street, if you like. You could buy shares in Lennon and McCartney, and lots of fans did. I have now seen the register of who held shares in Northern Songs, and it's very interesting. Lots of fans have got just 10 shares each, kind of thing, and which is interesting. But there were millions of these shares, and obviously there can be takeover bids, and shares get traded, and people can build up portfolios of shares and so on. John and Paul never had more than about 30% between them, but Dick James and his partner had 37.5%, and the rest of them were held by institutions and investors and so on, as I've said, fans.
And Brian, maybe?
Brian had some, but they went to his mother Queenie when he died.
Yeah.
So there was.
And Paul had more than John.
There was suddenly a situation where the John and Paul had an agreement between themselves, just a verbal thing, of that they both held the same number of shares, and then there was a time in '69 when, with all the negotiations that were going on, and everyone had to put their things on the table and declare what they had. John saw that Paul had more and had bought more without telling him, so that wasn't a happy moment, I don't suppose. John mentioned it in a couple of interviews, so he was obviously a bit pissed off about it. But Dick James and his partner had 37.5%, so they decided to sell. They got out. Why did they get out? Because the Beatles were such a hot potato by 1969. John and Yoko, John appearing nude on a record cover, John being busted for drugs, John doing the bed-in, which was obviously, from my point of view, a brilliant thing to do, but seemed to so many people to be so strange and crazy. They were all taking drugs to some extent or other, and long-haired, and they were rebels, and they had their own company, and they were belligerent. And when Brian Epstein was alive, Dick James had a cushion between him and the Beatles. His relationship was with Brian, and he would see the boys, come along to the session, drop in anytime he liked Dick, and Dick would, and he would be chummy, and he would be nice, and then he would go. But without Brian there as the cushion, Dick James and the Beatles, or the Beatles, brushed up. They clashed with one another, and they were quite rough to Dick James. They brought him into Apple in May 1968 to Wigmore Street, and they put him through a tough meeting and filmed it, and then showed that film at an American record convention. Well, I can't imagine that would have gone down very well with Dick James. It's a terrible thing to have done, and that doesn't necessarily excuse what his selling of the shares, but it sets some context.
Yeah.
He felt he had less. He need show less loyalty to them at that point than he would have done in previous times.
And probably you could get more money from ATV than from John and Paul.
Probably so, and it was a business deal, and it didn't necessarily mean ATV were going to take over the company, because they still didn't have 50%. It was just he was getting rid of his shares. He was going to stay on as manager, hopefully, as if appointed, which he did, but he was going to get rid of his shares, which any shareholder is entitled to do. Morally speaking, of course, you wonder why it would have been the right thing to do to offer them to John. He was thinking a key part of it for a while. There's no doubt at the end of Tune In and into 63 that the axis of Dick James as publisher, George Martin as producer, recording manager, and Brian Epstein as, but obviously like you were more responsible for it.
Yeah.
And of course they existed before Dick James, and the talent was theirs, and theirs alone. But Dick was, because everyone wants to side with the Beatles all the time, because there's a natural inclination of fans to always want the Beatles' point of view. People, but that doesn't mean that the way he's been reported.
There's with I think an NME, New Musical Express, yes, yeah. And in this, John says, Paul and I are now working on a kind of song montage that we might do as one piece on one side. We've got 2 weeks to finish the whole thing, so we're really working at it. You can't say Paul and I are writing separately these days. We do both. When it comes to needing 500 songs by Friday, you gotta get together. I definitely find I work better when I've got a deadline to meet. It really frightens you, and you've got to churn them out. All the time I'm sort of arranging things in.
And he was at the Please Please Me album sessions. He was the one who suggested they do Twist and Shout. Yes,
very interesting.
Yeah.
Just turning back to the quote, this almost sounds like John and Paul of the good old days. Certainly a correction of the overriding view that from 1968 onwards, John and Paul are mainly writing by themselves.
What's the date of that interview?
It's the NME that appeared on the beginning of May, the 3rd of May 1969, and it was held in late April 1969.
Yes.
So already talking about a medley at this point.
Yes, it's clear that that's their thinking. It's a great insight into their thinking, because it's not on an actual level. If you look at the detail of what work they were doing in that period, that isn't, you can't quite see that coming yet. But just to know that they were aware of it is interesting. On that subject, John Lennon had a press conference at the Bed Inn on the first day when he opened the doors and the press came in. And someone said, "Is there a new Beatle record coming out soon?" And he says, "Yes, we've done about 12 tracks," and he's meaning the Get Back sessions. "We've done about 12 tracks. Paul's in New York, I think, still, is he? And so we're all meeting up in about 7 days. So I've used these 7 days, which I knew was Beatle-free, to do this event and have a sort of honeymoon and to speak to you. When is this Beatles album going to be on sale? Well, we've got to go back, remix the 8 tracks," by which he means 8-track tape, not 8 tracks, and do 4 more tracks. So it should be around the summer, I suppose. So I was thinking about this. I took that quote and I analysed it. As far as the Beatles were concerned, then, John is saying that the January 1969 sessions at Savile Row produced about 12 tracks. Then they recorded I Want You in February. So that makes 13, thereabouts. And he says they've got to do about 4 more Well, that would make 16 or 17 songs in total, which they always thought 14 for an album. Any album they're doing, 14. And they always do more because they're going to do a single with it, A-side and B-side. So they're looking to do 16 or 17. So John is saying we need to do 4 more. And what that is confirmation that the sessions that the Beatles have in April '69 were meant to complete the Get Back LP. We look at them now as the beginning of the Abbey Road album, but in their mind, at that time, those tracks in April were for the completion of the Get Back LP, which became Let It Be. So what do? Well, they do The Ballad of John and Yoko, which is the single. They do Old Brown Shoe, which becomes the B-side. They do Something, but it's hard to know whether that was going to go on the LP, the Get Back LP. George has already got For You Blue on it, but maybe he would have had Something as well. Oh Darling is an April recording. Octopus's Garden, so that would have given Ringo a song on the Get Back LP. It's the only Beatles album that he doesn't have a vocal on, isn't it?
The Let It Be album, yeah.
Yeah, if you take out Magical Mystery Tour, because that wasn't an album really. Yeah, every album. So Let It Be album doesn't, so they were going to put Octopus's Garden on it. They do the Let It Be overdubs, and then they do You Know My Name. Now I don't know whether that to completion, I don't know whether that was going to be something for that or whether they were just finishing it off. And then in May, they start with You Never Give Me Your Money, and that, I imagine, could be where the melody idea is beginning. And Glyn Johns then goes away and assembles the Get Back LP. He's got all these tracks to choose from, but all he does is compile what they recorded in January. He doesn't include I Want You, even, which was definitely part of the same set of sessions just 3 weeks later.
But he was asked to do it in the beginning of March, I think, to assemble an album.
Yes, he was, but he was involved. The other thing about these sessions in April is that George Martin was again not involved in them. It was still again Glyn Johns.
Yeah.
So in their mind, as John said, we're going back to complete the LP we've started. So these are the tracks that in their mind at that point, they're planning for the Get Back LP. And yet when Glyn compiles it, he doesn't use any of them. Right. Probably under instruction on that basis, otherwise he would have done. Because why leave off, something?
Instruction of whom?
Maybe then, yes, well, Beatles, I expect. It couldn't be anybody else. I mean, George Martin's just not in the picture. He's producer, but he's not involved. So
that's why Billy Preston played on.
That's why Billy Preston comes back and carries on playing.
Yeah.
So what we know as half the Abbey Road album was really in their minds at the point of recording for the album to complete Get Back. And that's in this period when they go and shoot the recreation of the cover at EMI House of Angus McBean.
Yeah.
That's also in this same period. And then when that gets shelved, and Glyn hasn't put those songs on anyway, not that it matters because they're not using it, they say, well, we'll use these for our next record then. And then the only time that Abbey Road really is a focused set of sessions for the album that we know to be Abbey Road is the sessions that begin on the 1st of July.
Yeah. But in the meantime, like 14th of April, we had the recording of The Ballad of John and Yoko.
Yeah.
But I think the day before, or during the period, Get Back is released as a single.
Yes.
And why is that? Because they always released singles separately from an album. It ended up on the Let It Be album, but that's no discussion at this point.
Yeah.
Why release a single when there is no album yet backing it up or something?
Well,
that's
they did
the usual procedure.
Well, it became the usual procedure, but the Beatles would just release singles at periodic intervals. It was their longest ever interlude between records. They hadn't had a single out since Hey Jude.
That's true, yeah.
Which was the end of August, which means it was around through September and October. People always go on about the release dates, but the impact of Hey Jude, its presence high in the charts and on the radio and television, is September, October 68. Well, it's 6 months to April 69. 6 months, and they hadn't ever gone so long without releasing a record. So they knew they wanted to put one out. They were aware of putting records out. That's what they did.
Yeah.
So they decided they needed a single out, and they chose Get Back with Don't Let Me Down, and Paul and Glyn Johns did the mix. and did the remix when there was Paul heard it on the radio and didn't quite like the way it came over and went back in and remixed it. That was April '69, and then it was Rush's sued.
weekend. And now it's looking like it's going to be until Saturday. More than 80% of the flights here at LaGuardia were already canceled when the terminal opened Tuesday morning. Jay McVeigh with Southwest Airlines blames weather for the thousands of cancellations since last week's storm. That put us in a position where we struggle to recover. But that doesn't make sense to Savannah from Westchester.
Okay, can you tell me why I see another airline going to...
In South Jamaica, someone attacked 3 others around 1 a.m. They say it was a random attack. They allegedly walked into non-life-threatening injuries, according to authorities. And then on the 23rd, police say Codrington had gone there and got into an argument with the doctor, stabbed him in the back, torso, eye, and hand. Police say they found Codrington the next night driving the doctor's car in the Bronx and arrested him for 2 murders and multiple assaults. Those woes continue in Buffalo and western New York State. Now at least 35 people are dead in that region from the massive storm. that hit the area over the weekend. Driving bans to continue in Buffalo and surrounding communities, with the vehicles still litter side streets and highways. Everywhere. Direction of abandoned buses. Thousands of residents around Buffalo are without power, and the state of emergency remains in effect.
Anyone who declares victory and says it's over, it is way too early to say.
As correspondent Dave Graber, President Biden is offering federal help after New York applied for emergency aid. Wins News Time 1026 now. Bloomberg Money Watch on 1010 Wins. Here's Andrew O'Day. Much has been said about the pandemic's disruption to the education of children. The news based on the drop in mass for students on average will grow into less educated, lower skilled, and less productive adults, and will earn on average $70,000 less over the course of their lives than students educated just before the pandemic. More air is being let out of U.S. home prices. Today's S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Index of prices finds a slip of 0.25% in October, fourth month in a row of slipping home prices. From October last year, they were still up 9.25%, but that was the smallest annual gain in 2 years. Splits for Wall Street's indexes so far: Dow rising 0.1%, Nasdaq down more than 1%, S&P down almost 0.5%. Bloomberg Money Watch at 26 and 56 past every hour. I'm Andrew O'Day to 1010 Wins on 92.3 FM.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles with an auto warranty about to expire or with no warranty coverage at all. Due to a decline in the economy, CarShield is announcing a low-cost, month-to-month vehicle protection plan that is now available to the public to save any driver out-of-pocket expenses on future auto repairs. Call now to find out how you can pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Yes, you heard that correctly. Pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. An open phone line has been established for all drivers to call for a free quick quote. Call 800-360-0681 now. Drivers who are covered will not have to pay for covered repairs again. This protection plan is at an all-time low. Additionally, drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Call us for your free quick quote today. 800-360-0681. That's 800-360-0681. What do you have to lose? Call 800-360-0681. Again, 800-360-0681.
If you like burritos, which you do because everyone does, you should try Taco Bell's Chipotle Ranch and Salsa Verde grilled chicken burritos. These masterpieces start with a warm flour tortilla that we stuff with grilled chicken. But the real stars here are the bold sauces, Chipotle Ranch or Salsa Verde. In fact, the chicken is the stage upon which these sauces shine. Like this mic is a stage for me to spotlight my theatrical range. 2 chicken burritos, 2 bold flavors, $2 each. Order on the Taco Bell app. And participating in the Taco Bell locations for only contact local stores. Prices, hours, and participation with fair tax extra plus.
We expect our information in real time. U.S. Med carries continuous glucose monitors, which provide real-time readings of blood glucose levels. U.S. Med is an approved provider for Medicare and over 500 private insurers. So call 800-730-8405 today for a free insurance and Medicare benefits check. As easy as, that's 800-730-8405.
John, what I'm about to tell you is going to be big. I mean, really big.
Come on, Todd. What could be bigger than a new 2022 Ram 1500 Bighorn Quad Cab 4x4 from Ramsey Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram?
The amount of money you'll be saving on one of those big beauties during the Big Finish 2022 sales event.
$479 a month for 42 months with only $47.38 total to its signing plus tax, title, and registration. Not a bad stocking stuffer.
Especially when you see how many presents you can haul to all your relatives, John.
I bet Santa's ready to trade in his sleigh.
$479 per month for 42 months for a new 2022 Ram 1500 Bighorn Quad Cab 4x4 is the gift that keeps on giving all year.
At Ramsey Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram.
Exceptional people, exceptional deals.
Okay, 906-61 for details. Includes tax, title, and registration. MSRP $50,750. Number ended 45418. $0 security deposit. Offer ends 1/3/23.
Wins News Time at the Tone, 10:30. Good morning, I'm Bud Fishkin. With thousands of migrants flooding into El Paso every day, the Supreme Court may decide as soon as today on Title 42, the Trump administration policy initially dealing with COVID that became an anti-immigration measure.
Migrants by the thousands are flooding into El Paso every day, waiting outside
As the Supreme Court weighs whether to lift Title 42, the Biden administration has asked the court to end it. The High Court put a temporary hold on lifting the policy a little over a week ago and is expected to issue a ruling soon.
That's correspondent Stacy Lynn. Wins News Time, 10:31. It's time for traffic and transit on the ones with Karen Stewart.
Route 21 is open in Belleville. It is open all lanes, both ways. Earlier problems there with an accident investigation have been rounded up and taken care of, and we are back in business. Cleared also is that westbound 46 accident by Willowbrook at Route 23. The right lane was blocked there. It did cause a little bit of slowdown, but it's gone now, or almost gone. Tonley Avenue, however, both ways in North Bergen in Jersey City remains closed on the right lane north of Secaucus Road. The right lane is shut down because we have a down pole and wires, and this is both ways. So we've got the right lane shut going northbound and the right lane shut going southbound. And if you're heading into the northern suburbs, eastbound Route 287 near the NET, the New England Thruway, traffic delays there with an accident. We're talking 10 minutes in at the George and Lincoln, 15 minutes in over at the Holland Tunnel. We've got road work both ways, Bell Parkway approaching Ocean Parkway causing delays, and South Staten Island Expressway Victory has construction. That's causing some delays too. But all of your Staten Island River crossings are in good shape. Alternate side is in effect today. We're sponsored by the Barnes Firm Traffic Tip Line at 844-JAM-1010. Traffic and transit every 10 minutes on the ones. I'm Karen Stewart, 1010 wins on 92.3 FM.
I'm attorney Rich Barnes. If you've been in a car crash, choosing the right firm is crucial to get the help you need and the best result possible.
Manhattan, Long Island. Check out the Penguins AccuWeather forecast now. And good morning to meteorologist Dean DeVore.
All right, good morning, but it is not the prettiest morning out there. These kind of hanging tough over us. There's been some breaks in them up north of the city, and I do think as we get into the afternoon, the clouds could break for a little bit of sunshine. The good news is we are going to get above freezing. We haven't been there since before Christmas. So 36 is the projected high for the city today. Temperatures tonight will fall back to a low about 29 in the city and near suburbs, low 20s inland. It may be one of those nights, Bud, where the temperature drops to a point early and then actually starts pushing. Continues upper 40s to near 50 Thursday, well into the 50s Friday, and over the weekend we're into the 50s as well, but it comes wet with some rain, I think, right centered on New Year's Eve into Sunday morning. It's going to be a pretty good pouring downpour situation, or at least some very steady rain, so that's something you're going to have to keep an eye on. At least it's mild, though. Right now, it's still chilly, 30 degrees, clouds, maybe a few sunny breaks. We'll get up to 36 and really get that warm-up going the rest of the week. I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Dean DeVore on New York's weather station, 1010 Winds on 92.3 FM.
Dean, thank you. Wins News Time, 10:34. In Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu is set to take power again for a sixth term as prime minister. But there is plenty of controversy and criticism for his joining forces with Israel's far-right leaders.
Benjamin Netanyahu's new right-wing Israeli government set to be sworn in on Thursday. That as the returning prime minister continues to face a deluge of criticism for giving far-right leaders unprecedented powers over the lives of Palestinians, settlement building, and West Bank security leaders, positions formerly held by veteran military commanders. Jordana Miller, ABC News, Jerusalem.
In Iran, a former soccer player who has criticized the country's crackdown on anti-regime protesters says he and his family were prevented from leaving the country.
Ali Daei, who has expressed support for anti-government protests in Iran, has said the flight they were on was diverted to Iran's Kish Islands. Once there, they were questioned by authorities. Daei had said his own passport was briefly confiscated after returning to the country earlier this year. A news agency known to be close to the Revolutionary Guard said a travel ban was imposed on Daei's wife earlier this month because of her support for the protests. It said she tried to illegally bypass the ban and that her final destination was the US. I'm Karen Chamas.
Back in this country, if you wait until January 1st to buy an electric vehicle, you might qualify for a tax credit of up to $7,500. But it's complicated. Getting the credit won't be easy, though. It depends on where the vehicle and battery were made, among other things. For example, several EV models made by Kia, Hyundai, and Audi won't qualify because they're manufactured outside North America. Some GM and Tesla vehicles may only qualify for half of the credit, and there are income and vehicle cost limits. In addition to EVs, the credit applies to some plug-in gas-electric hybrids and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. For people who buy a used vehicle that runs on battery power, a $4,000 credit will be available depending on their income.
That's correspondent Christopher Cruz. Wins News Time 10:36. Time for our 10 Wins Entertainment News. At the box office, not a very Merry Christmas, thanks in part to people staying home because of the winter storm.
The Way of Water connects all things. The Avatar sequel, The Way of Water, was the only place $90 million Friday and Monday. It was a strong haul, and the film's expected to cost $1 billion worldwide this week. In second, the animated and all the Christmas box office. When we use share on one thing, it becomes a million things for our planet. It's one thing. American cruise voyages in North America's mighty rivers, Great Lakes, oceans, and expeditions to the wilds of Alaska. Call 844-744-0794 or contact your travel professional. Have you been one week this year? Cats don't care. At Jacksonville, you can still get up to $4,500 for the holidays. Some bucks now, more bucks in January. So be naughty. Snap up all the ginger snaps. Wear a pretty sweater to an ugly sweater holiday party. You can still get up to $4,500 when you go to Jackson Hewitt today. Details at Jackson Hewitt. Apply. You know, we plan for Memorial Chapel. Our professionals at Riverside have helped thousands of New York families plan ahead and take that burden off their loved ones. And by planning now, you can design what you want, even lock in prices. That way it's your decision, and your family won't have to second guess what you would have wanted. Just visit riversidememorialchapel.com. That's riversidememorialchapel.com, or call us at 212-362-6600. That's 212-362-6600. Riverside Memorial Chapel. The generation.
Donate your car today at carsforkids.org. That's cars with a K. Your car, running or not, can be picked.
These random crimes on the subway. The chaos caused by everything with Trump, but especially the death and everything with COVID really has disoriented people.
John, thank you. Thank you very much for your call. John went much further than I thought he was going to go, to be perfectly honest. What he had emphasized to our screener, at least as it got transmitted to me, was George Santos. So, heads up, Ozzy, I know your latest article for the Washington Post is about George Santos. And just to refresh our listeners' memory about what's happening here, Congressman-elect George Santos, Republican, from parts of Queens and Nassau County, admitted this weekend, after the New York Times revealed a lot of this stuff, that he didn't graduate from college, as he had claimed, said he went to Baruch, never went to Baruch, didn't work for Citigroup or Goldman Sachs, as he claimed, didn't own a dozen different properties like he claimed. Apparently he owns no properties, but is looking to buy a house. He told the New York Post, doesn't live in the district he was elected to represent, lives with his sister in Huntington, that's not in the district, and really isn't Jewish. Part of his identity for his campaign was that he's a Latino, Jewish, gay Republican. Other than that, he's mostly who he says he is. How did he get away with this for 2 election cycles? He ran in 2020 against Tom Suozzi in that district. The Democrats didn't figure it out. The media didn't figure it out. It happened again now. And the Times somehow figured it out after the election. How did he get away with it?
So, I think that is also sort of represented in the feedback we're getting from callers and people on Twitter about what's the main story of 2022. candidates, operatives, and even reporters and editors try to see not only what is true and accurate, but what is the main story that people need to hear and understand. And you're right, due diligence was not done for 2 election cycles, which is not great if you are an Oppo researcher, if you're an opponent, if you are someone who is dedicated to reporting on these elections. But I also think that the public, voters, earnest reporters who were asking themselves, what does the public really need to see and understand? Oftentimes it's who's going to help with the economy? Are my streets going to get safer? Is someone going to plow the streets? The general public, like a voter's first question isn't always, is this person's resume exactly as they say it is? Right. That's not to excuse it, but it's just to say it's not always the first question in mind. But back now, I think it's 2023, one of the first questions I may be asking people are, can you prove what you just said? You proceed.
Yeah, I guess after that. Susan, can you name one important Democratic and one important Republican policy idea of this year? We've just been talking about how some of the biggest stories of the year are not policy. The big lie is not policy, as you referenced before. George Santos making up most of his biography is policy. So, name one important Democratic or Republican policy idea of this year, locally or nationally, and, excluding election denial, which is not policy. Which was one important Democratic and one important Republican policy idea this year for you covering Washington for the New Yorkers?
Well, Stacey, Ryan, I'm going to actually go with and rather than or, because I think part of, this moment we're living in is this extraordinary polarized partisan moment, but in some ways the policy of the year that was most surprising and was one that was overwhelmingly bipartisan, and that is the extraordinary amount of support that both Democrats and Republicans have offered to Ukraine in the war against Russia. And this, by the way, was a surprise in the sense that you have a vocal, what you might even call pro-Putin faction in the Republican Party led by Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, and yet, again, you're looking at an enormous amount of something like more than $40 billion in one package alone. Earlier, significant as well, because it represents, a level of not only military commitment, but also economic commitment. People may not realize that the United States is and others potentially hoping to fund the payroll for the Ukrainian government as Russia has attacked all of its normal, economy, turning the electricity back on in that country, and transforming the security in the world. If you had said a year ago that Sweden and Finland would abandon decades and in some cases centuries of neutrality in Europe to join NATO, that would not have been credible. It's a remarkable transformation. And it represents a way we haven't yet mentioned, but I do think it's extremely significant because nuclear anxiety, nuclear anxiety was on the world. For the first time in a series that I can remember since I was a kid in the 1980s. This is a huge shift, and we have all in many ways become victims of a form of nuclear blackmail that Putin has been using, essentially threatening the West to, not force the country involved in the conflict by nuclear. And that level of nuclear weapons is something that is obviously we haven't seen since the darkest days of Cold War. And I think it's a major shift in our politics for a long time to come. But at this point, I do think that is a policy, a bipartisan policy that we wouldn't have been on a year ago.
One important Democratic and one important Republican policy idea of the year?
I'll point out to this one, as opposed to two, but it's experiment with free public transit.
important Democratic, one important Republican policy idea from 2022? We're not completely post-policy, right?
I hope not, Brian. I really do. As always, I am impressed with Democrats' willingness to put money into infrastructure, just because we know that across the country, so much of our infrastructure is crumbling. Some of my concerns about the government that we'll see this new congressional legislative sworn in makes me a little bit worried about whether or not we can get anything done, especially with the use of the filibuster.
We'll continue in a minute with Ozzy Paper from the Washington Post, Christina Greer from Fordham, Susan Glasser from the New Yorker, and you on a year in review, 2022 hangout. What should 2022 be remembered for? Tweet us, call us, stay with us.
Partnering with organizations to promote justice and equality for all New Yorkers.